What makes a film so controversial that people can't stop talking about it? The 1970s were packed with movies that shocked critics, tested censors, and still drew crowds. Some were banned, others became cult sensations, but all of them proved Hollywood wasn't afraid to push limits. These are 12 of the most talked about films the industry fought to keep in front of audiences. A Clockwork Orange, 1971. Few films define the clash between artistic ambition and public outrage quite like Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange. Based on Anthony Burgess's novel, the film dropped viewers into a futuristic England where violent youth gangs ruled the streets. The story followed Alex, played by Malcolm McDowell, whose love for Beethoven contrasted sharply with his disturbing behavior. Kubrick shot it with cold precision, clinical camera angles, surreal set designs, and an unsettling use of classical music against harsh acts. When the film premiered in 1971, critics were torn. Some praised its daring style, while others called it irresponsible. In Britain, it ignited debates over whether films could inspire real crime. Reports surfaced of youths mimicking scenes fueling a moral panic. The controversy grew so intense that Kubrick himself requested the movie be pulled from UK theaters for decades. Meanwhile, in America, Warner Brothers leaned into the storm. They marketed it as daring, dangerous, and essential viewing, and audiences lined up. What kept people glued to their seats was not just shock value, but Kubrick's hypnotic storytelling. The film forced viewers to confront uncomfortable questions about free will, government control, and whether punishment can ever create true reform. Its imagery became iconic: the bowler hats, the white outfits, the haunting stare of McDowell under false eyelashes. Even with the outrage, A Clockwork Orange was nominated for multiple Academy Awards, including Best Picture. Looking back, it wasn't just a movie, it was a cultural event. It showed how cinema could provoke society itself, not just entertain. Love it or hate it, you couldn't ignore it. Straw Dogs, 1971. Sam Peckinpah had already built a reputation for pushing boundaries, but Straw Dogs took it to another level. Released in 1971, the film followed Dustin Hoffman as an American mathematician who moves with his wife, played by Susan George, to a quiet English village. The setting seemed calm, but the underlying tension between outsiders and locals set the stage for chaos. Peckinpah, known for his gritty style, directed with an eye for slow-burn suspense. The story built pressure minute by minute, until the dam finally burst in a violent home invasion. Viewers were shocked by the intensity which stood apart from the polished thrillers of the era. Critics didn't hold back. Some accused the movie of glorifying cruelty, while others defended it as a raw exploration of human instincts under pressure. What made Straw Dogs controversial wasn't just its violence, it was how personal it felt. The isolated countryside, the eerie silence, and Hoffman's transformation from timid academic to desperate fighter unsettled audiences. The movie blurred the line between civility and primal survival. Was the violence justified, or was it showing how quickly society's rules break down when pushed? Despite protests and bans in several countries, the film stayed in circulation. Hollywood marketed it as a must-see for anyone curious about the limits of cinema. Peckinpah himself defended the work, insisting it wasn't about glorification, but about confronting what lies beneath the surface of ordinary people. Over time, Straw Dogs has been reevaluated. Modern critics recognize it as a sharp, if troubling, examination of masculinity, fear, and the breaking point of human endurance. It might not be comfortable to watch, but that's exactly why it remains unforgettable. Last Tango in Paris, 1972. When Bernardo Bertolucci released Last Tango in Paris in 1972, the film world didn't know what hit it. Starring Marlon Brando and Maria Schneider, it told the story of two strangers who embark on a brief but intense relationship in Paris. Unlike mainstream romance dramas of the time, this film leaned into raw emotion and stripped-down storytelling. Brando's performance was full of improvisation, and Schneider brought a naturalism that felt both vulnerable and fearless. What shocked audiences was the unfiltered intimacy on screen. Hollywood was still adjusting to the freedom of the post-production code era, and here came a film that didn't just test boundaries, it bulldozed right through them. Critics were immediately divided. Pauline Kael hailed it as a masterpiece, praising Brando's performance as groundbreaking, while others dismissed it as exploitative. The controversies didn't stop at critical debate. In several countries, censors attempted to block or heavily cut the film. Despite these hurdles, it became a box office success, proving that audiences were curious about films that went where others feared to tread. The film's unapologetic style made it part of countless discussions in universities and film clubs. Over the years, Last Tango in Paris has remained one of the most debated films of the decade. It forced the industry to acknowledge that movies could provoke not just entertainment, but genuine discomfort and debate. Whether seen as art or as an excess of the director's ambition, it cemented Brando's reputation for taking daring risks, even in the later stages of his career. For Hollywood, it was another reminder that controversy didn't always sink a film. Sometimes it guaranteed people would keep talking and watching. Deliverance, 1972. John Borman's Deliverance might look like a simple tale of city men heading into the wilderness, but its impact was anything but simple. Released in 1972, it followed four Atlanta businessmen, played by Burt Reynolds, John Voight, Ned Beatty, and Ronnie Cox, on a canoe trip through the remote Georgia backwoods. What began as an adventurous escape from the city turned into a harrowing survival story. The film's tension came not only from the unforgiving river, but also from the hostile locals the group encountered. The violence that followed stunned audiences. Hollywood had seen plenty of thrillers, but Deliverance felt disturbingly real. The performances were raw, the cinematography placed viewers directly in the wilderness, and the now famous banjo scene added an eerie tone that stayed with viewers long after. Critics noted how the movie wasn't just about survival, but also about masculinity, vulnerability, and the fragility of civilization when faced with nature's brutality. The shocking moments drew backlash, yet they also ensured the film's place in cultural memory. Some theaters faced protests, while others sold out as word of mouth spread. For Burt Reynolds, it was a breakthrough role that catapulted him into stardom. For audiences, it was a film they couldn't forget, even if they wanted to. Deliverance went on to earn Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, proving that controversy and critical acclaim could coexist. At its core, the film forced viewers to consider just how unprepared ordinary people are when stripped of safety nets. It was both an adventure and a nightmare rolled into one. The Exorcist, 1973. When William Friedkin's The Exorcist hit theaters in December of 1973, it wasn't just another horror movie, it was a full-blown cultural earthquake. Based on William Peter Blatty's novel, the story of young Regan, her frantic mother, and two priests attempting to help her, became one of the most talked-about films of the decade. The imagery, special effects, and unrelenting intensity shocked audiences. Reports spread of people fainting in theaters, running out in distress, or lining up for repeat viewings just to test their nerve. Warner Brothers leaned into the hysteria, turning the film into a must-see event. Critics were split. Some hailed it as a masterpiece of suspense and psychological terror, while others dismissed it as gratuitous. What made The Exorcist unique was its blend of grounded realism with shocking imagery. Friedkin shot it with documentary-like precision, making even the most outrageous scenes feel disturbingly plausible. For audiences in the early 1970s, who were used to haunted house stories and campy horror, this was something entirely new. Despite protests and calls for bans, the film became one of the highest-grossing movies of the decade. It even scored 10 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture, a rare achievement for a horror film. Its success paved the way for future directors to take horror seriously as both art and box office gold. Over time, The Exorcist has been labeled one of the greatest horror films ever. Made but in 1973, it was simply the movie everyone was either too scared or too curious to miss. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974. When Tobe Hooper unleashed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in 1974, audiences weren't ready. Shot on a shoestring budget in the sweltering Texas heat, the film followed a group of friends who stumble into the isolated home of a strange and terrifying family. What they found there was not polished Hollywood horror, but something that looked alarmingly close to real life. The movie's grainy film stock, relentless pacing, and unhinged performances gave it the feel of a documentary gone wrong. Despite its frightening reputation, Hooper avoided showing much on-screen gore. Instead, he relied on suggestion sound design and atmosphere to make viewers believe they had seen far more than they actually did. That psychological trick made the film even more disturbing. Censors around the world didn't see nuance, though. The movie was banned in several countries and faced heavy restrictions in others. In Britain, it became a symbol of the debate over how far horror films should be allowed to go. Yet, all the controversy only fueled its popularity. Young audiences who heard whispers about its shocking power were determined to see it for themselves, and theaters cashed in. The figure of Leatherface wielding his roaring chainsaw and hiding behind a mask of human skin became an instant icon of horror. What surprised many was how the film also touched on deeper themes: isolation, economic decline, and the darker sides of rural America. By the end of the decade, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre had cemented itself, not just as a cult hit, but as one of the most influential horror films ever made. It proved that fear, when stripped down to its essentials, could be more powerful than any studio spectacle. Caligula, 1979. By the late 1970s, cinema had already pushed boundaries, but Caligula managed to outdo nearly all of them. Financed by Penthouse publisher Bob Guccione and directed at least initially by Tinto Brass, the film promised a grand historical epic about the rise and fall of Rome's most notorious emperor. With a cast that included Malcolm McDowell, Helen Mirren, and Peter O'Toole, it looked like a legitimate prestige project. What followed was chaos. The production became a tug-of-war between artistic vision and sensationalism. Brass clashed with producers who later inserted additional material without his approval. The final cut stunned audiences with its mix of lavish Roman sets, political intrigue, and scenes that many found shockingly explicit. Hollywood didn't know how to market it. On one hand, it had the cast of a serious epic and a budget that rivaled major studio films. On the other, it carried a reputation that made mainstream theaters nervous. Yet, that notoriety became part of the appeal. Lines formed at select theaters curious to see what all the whispers were about. Critics were savage. Some called it a disaster, while others argued it was a daring experiment that revealed the corruption of power in ancient Rome. The film's controversy sparked lawsuits, bans, and years of debate over whether it should be considered art or exploitation. Despite all of that, or perhaps because of it, Caligula found an audience. To this day, it stands as a bizarre monument to how the 1970s pushed the limits of what studios and stars were willing to risk. In the realm of the senses, 1976. Though technically a Japanese-French co-production, Negisa Oshima's In the Realm of the Senses made waves internationally, including in Hollywood circles. Released in 1976, the film told the story of an obsessive relationship that spiraled far beyond conventional boundaries. What made it instantly controversial was the decision to present intimacy on screen with a level of realism rarely seen in mainstream cinema. Censors around the world scrambled to respond. In Japan, where it was made, the film could not even be fully released without edits. In the United States, it was distributed on a limited basis and often faced challenges from local authorities. For some, this only heightened its reputation as a film people weren't supposed to see. Critics were sharply divided. Some hailed Oshima's work as fearless art exploring themes of passion control and the extremes of human emotion. Others dismissed it as indulgent. Regardless of opinion, everyone seemed to agree it was unforgettable. Despite all the pushback, In the Realm of the Senses became a talking point in film schools and among cinephiles. Hollywood, still testing the limits of the post-studio system era, watched closely. The movie forced uncomfortable questions. How far could directors go in portraying relationships on screen? Where was the line between art and provocation? While it never became a mainstream hit, its legacy is undeniable. It opened the door for filmmakers worldwide to push intimacy and realism in bold new directions. More than just controversial, it became a landmark in the global conversation about cinema's freedom. Salò, or The 120 Days of Sodom, 1975. Pier Paolo Pasolini's Salò, or The 120 Days of Sodom, is often cited as one of the most shocking films ever made. Released in 1975, it adapted the infamous 18th-century novel by the Marquis de Sade, but set it against the backdrop of fascist Italy during the final days of World War II. The film depicted a group of powerful figures subjecting young captives to extreme degradation. From the start, Salò was banned, censored, and denounced around the world. In some countries, it was immediately pulled from theaters. In others, screenings became events where people protested outside. Pasolini insisted the movie was not about shock for its own sake, but a commentary on the corruption of power, cruelty, and the loss of humanity under oppressive systems. Cinematically, it was carefully constructed. The sterile sets, the rigid organization of events, and the matter-of-fact delivery created an almost clinical effect. That coldness made the cruelty feel even more disturbing. While many critics condemned the film, some argued it was one of the boldest political allegories of the decade. What kept Hollywood and the film community talking was its sheer audacity. Whether you viewed it as art or as unwatchable excess, it was impossible to ignore. Over time, it became a fixture of debates about censorship and artistic freedom. For better or worse, Salò showed just how far the 70s pushed the boundaries of cinema. Eraserhead, 1977. Before David Lynch became a household name with Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks, he delivered one of the strangest debuts of the decade, Eraserhead. Released in 1977 after years of independent production, this black-and-white surrealist film looked unlike anything Hollywood had ever seen. The story followed Henry Spencer, a nervous young man in an industrial wasteland who struggles with the pressures of parenthood after his girlfriend gives birth to a deformed infant. The plot was thin, but that was never the point. Lynch filled the film with bizarre imagery, unsettling sound design, and dreamlike sequences that lingered in the subconscious. Mainstream studios didn't know what to do with it, so Eraserhead found its home as a midnight movie. Audiences in art theaters were stunned, confused, or fascinated. Some walked out, others came back again and again, convinced the movie contained hidden meanings. Critics were equally baffled. While some dismissed it as nonsense, others recognized it as a groundbreaking work of surreal cinema. Hollywood didn't embrace it at first, but the movie's cult following grew rapidly. Filmmakers like Stanley Kubrick reportedly admired its originality, and Lynch's vision eventually earned him major projects. In hindsight, Eraserhead proved that the 70s weren't just about excess, they were about experimentation. It showed that a low-budget, deeply personal project could shake up cinema just as much as a blockbuster. Pink Flamingos, 1972. If ever there was a movie that thrived on controversy, it was John Waters' Pink Flamingos. Released in 1972, the film was an underground production shot on a tiny budget in Baltimore. Starring the drag performer Divine, it followed a bizarre rivalry over who could claim the title of filthiest person alive. Unlike polished Hollywood productions, Pink Flamingos wore its rough edges proudly. The camera work was raw, the acting was deliberately exaggerated, and the humor was outrageous. Waters had no interest in playing it safe. Instead, he embraced the shock factor, daring audiences to look away. Mainstream critics slammed it as trash, but it quickly became a sensation in the midnight movie circuit. For audiences bored with conventional cinema, it was a rebellious alternative. People lined up not because they expected Polish, but because they wanted to see what all the whispers were about. Hollywood, of course, didn't push the film, but its notoriety spread quickly. Its influence on underground and independent cinema was undeniable. Waters showed that you didn't need a studio, a big budget, or polished stars to make a mark. You just needed nerve and originality. Today, Pink Flamingos remains a cult classic, celebrated for its unapologetic weirdness. It may not have been a Hollywood release in the traditional sense, but the industry could not ignore it. The movie proved that controversy could sometimes be the best marketing tool of all. The Devils, 1971. Ken Russell's The Devils was one of the boldest films of the early 70s, and Warner Brothers has never released it in its complete form. Released in 1971, the movie was based on Aldous Huxley's The Devils of Loudun, a historical account of events in 17th century France. It followed Oliver Reed as a priest caught in a whirlwind of political schemes, accusations, and hysteria. What made the film so controversial was Russell's over-the-top style. Lavish sets, chaotic crowd scenes, and Reed's intense performance created a fever dream of a movie. Some sequences were so startling that censors demanded cuts before release. Even then, many theaters refused to show it. Critics were divided. Some praised its ambition and bold visual style, while others condemned it as excessive. Yet audiences who did see it couldn't stop talking about it. The debate over The Devils raged for years, with fans demanding an uncut version. To this day, Warner Brothers has never officially released the full film, though bootlegs and partial restorations circulate among collectors. The legacy of The Devils is clear. It stood as proof that the 70s were a time when filmmakers were willing to test every boundary, even if it meant being locked away in studio vaults. It's the film Hollywood tried hardest to hide, and for that reason, it has become one of the most infamous of the decade. And there you have it, 12 movies from the 1970s that stirred outrage but refused to be ignored. Some are classics, some are cult legends, and every one of them left its mark. Which of these would you dare to watch again? Share your pick, hit subscribe, and join us as we dig into more stories Hollywood tried to keep quiet.